Good afternoon, everyone. My teammates and I are here to discuss the lesson that is all about other health impairment. And to begin the discussion regarding to this subject matter, may I call on Mr. Cyrus Rafael Macaraig.
To formally discuss what is other health impairment, here is a quotation by Sharon Angle that there is a plan and a purpose, a value to every life, no matter what its location, age, gender, or disability. This means that equality is about ensuring that every individual has an equal opportunity to make the most of their lives and talents. It is also believed that no one should have poorer life chances because of the way they were born, where they come from, what they believe, or whether they have a disability. Because equality recognizes that historically certain groups of people with protected characteristics such as race, disability, sex, and sexual orientation have experienced discrimination throughout the different eras.
And now, may I call on Ms. Manong Song Lordeline to discuss what is other health impairment.
So, the first act is Individual with Disabilities Act 2015, which is other health impairment. Means having limited strength, vitality, or alertness, including a heightened alertness to environmental stimuli that results in limited alertness with respect to educational environment that is due to chronic or acute health problems such as asthma, attention deficit disorder, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, diabetes, epilepsy, a heart condition, hemophilia, lead poisoning, leukemia, nephritis, rheumatic fever, sickle cell anemia, Tourette syndrome, and adversely affects a child's educational performance. Yes, it can affect on the child's educational performance, which can lead to anxiety and depression. It only means that is a health problem which results in medication, treatments, therapies, frequent doctor's appointments, and repeated hospitalization can impact the student's ability to learn and function at school. Health problems may significantly impact academic, behavioral, social, or emotional functioning. Some cases of health problems that can lead to distraction so that everyone cannot focus on their studies. According to Logsdon, 2016, other health impairment means having a disability caused by disease, condition, disorder, or injury that substantially affects strength, vitality, or alertness. To be identified with other health impairment, the student's condition must cause a substantial impact on his educational performance. It also stated that the other health impairment, OHI, are medical conditions such as asthma, diabetes, epilepsy, sickle cell anemia, which impaired to such a degree that they adversely affects a student's educational performance. Therefore, other health impairment is one of the disabilities that everyone might experience it. We are not aware of its existence, but it takes a great effort for us to notice it. People who have such disabilities are sometimes forsaken due to their needs. At some point, it can limit happiness and experience in enjoying life.
And now may I call on Mr. Cyrus Rafael Macaraig to discuss the history of other health impairment.
As what I have mentioned earlier, that disability experience a different times in different eras. Well, in fact, in ancient civilizations, the harshness of physical environment shaped public and private reaction to individuals with disabilities. Individuals who could not contribute to group survival, their physical strength or ability to bear a children would not viewed as assets. Medical care for people with severe disabilities would have been limited or impossible. Under such basic and harsh conditions, many individuals with disabilities died in infancy or early childhood because they were called for infanticide. Those who have suffered illness or injury later in life fared little better. However, written artifacts reveal that attempts were made in ancient times to heal or ease the effects of illness, as stated by Lobkin on 1995. The evolving authority of religion in Western Europe during the Middle Ages gave rise to the concept of humane interest in care. People with developmental disabilities or mental illness church protection. Conversely, they might be perceived as children of God and afforded or sometimes perceived as possessed by evil spirits or representing the outcomes of sin or association with fairies, elves, or demons. Whereas the developmentally disabled child of God was venerated as a blessing, the individual whose behaviors were influenced by evil spirits was believed to have willfully chosen this path. Furthermore, developing medical inquiry and discovery in Western Europe supported a more scientific response to disability. Understanding linkages between contagion and some diseases contributed to reforms in hospital care, although the notion persisted that some disabilities, example is epilepsy, were also contagious. Social reform resulting from political events also influenced community reactions toward disability. For example, the French Revolution instilled a sense of community responsibility that resulted in social reform and education. The efforts of such pioneers in special education as Louis Braille, Thomas Hopkins Gallaudet, Jean-Marc Gaspard Itard, and Edward Seguin resulted in specialized instructional and behavioral adaptations for people with disabilities. Along with the efforts of these individuals came the establishment of large residential institutions to provide training and protection. However, the original vision residential institutions for specialized training would cure people of their disabilities was not fulfilled, and they degenerated into places of custodial care. Whereas living situations for individuals with disabilities have moved away from segregated institutions toward independent living, paired living, and supported living in small community-based residential facilities. The inclusion of students with disabilities in general education parallels this shift and reflects the acknowledgement that individuals with physical, health, or multiple disabilities contribute positively to their families and society. The perception that a disability represents A deficit that must be treated is being replaced with the notion that a disability is but one aspect of an individual. Self-determination is also gaining prominence in the lives of individuals with disabilities, largely due to the influence of the disability rights movement. One example of other health impairment whose individuals are suffering of was President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Is credited with bringing disability issues into federal politics through promotion of his New Deal. The 1935 Social Security Act provided funds for vocational rehabilitation for people with disabilities, as well as retirement and insurance benefits. Although he was an early proponent of his rights and services for individuals with disabilities, Roosevelt was reluctant to incorporate his own disability, which is polio, into his public image. Well, current scholars have criticized this behavior as an effort to promote the concept of overcoming disability rather than confronting its impact through political and social means. This means that arising problems was created when President Roosevelt arrange an act which will give assistance, protection, and safety to people with disabilities, including him who's suffering from polio. After World War II, disabled veterans added a powerful voice to demands for civil rights in vocational rehabilitation and physical access to jobs, services, and other life activities. Individuals with disabilities also gained from Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954, which prohibited racial segregation in education and provided the foundation for inclusion of students with disabilities in schools with peers without disabilities. In the Filipino context, other health impairment is viewed as a represent of divine punishment for sins or moral transgressions against God that were committed by the parents of their ancestors. I will not read the whole context because it only focuses on the perception of Filipinos about health impairment as a sin or as a mistake or as a punishment from God because they were committed to something that is believable by their ancestors because during the time of their ancestors there were no scientific explanation why a certain individual is suffering from this kind of disability, and the discoveries were later discovered during the different eras. Adult health impairment may also be associated with supernatural ailments that are attributed to other spiritual causes. In this paragraph, it also stated that other than being a punishment or a mistake or a sin that is being punished by the God, it also perceived that health impairment was viewed once as associated with supernatural ailments such as evil spirits, fairies, elves, and demons. They believe that people suffering from disabilities or health impairments were possessed by evil creatures.
And now we are moving to the characteristics of the other health impairment. The first one is the AD and the ADHD. ADD stands for Attention Deficit Disorder, while ADHD stands for Attention Deficit or Hyperactivity Disorder. Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder is a developmental condition of inattention and distractibility with or without accompanying hyperactivity. And according to what I have researched, hyperattention deficit disorder, it is a mental condition and it often begin in childhood and persisting into later life. And it is also characterized by persistent difficulty in maintaining attention and concentration, sometimes with a degree of hyperactive behavior. So when we say hyperactive, it is abnormally or extremely active. And according to what I've researched last time, how can you tell if someone has attention deficit disorder? They often has trouble holding attention on task or play activities. They often does not seem to listen when spoken to directly, often does not follow through on instructions and fails to finish schoolwork, chores, or duties in the workplace, like for example, loses focus or sidetracked. And they often has trouble organizing tasks and activity. The next one is the diabetes. This is the most common other health impairment that we all know. And the diabetes, it is a disease in which the body does not produce or use insulin properly. Insulin is a hormone that our body uses to convert sugar, starches, and other food into the energy we need. And the symptoms that we need to observe is that the frequent urination, the excessive thirst, the extreme hunger, the weight loss, fatigue, irritability, and blurry vision. So if ever that we experience this kind of symptoms, it is better for us to consult a doctor in order for us to know if we do have diabetes or not. And this is the example of a kid who has an ADHD, and as you can see on the photo, his mother is having a hard time on controlling him. The next one is the photo that represents a woman that having a consultation to a doctor. The next one, other health impairment that we often know or we often watch on television, particularly in news, is the epilepsy. And according to the Epilepsy Foundation of America, epilepsy is a physical condition that occurs when there is a sudden, brief change in how the brain works. When brain cells are not working properly, a person's consciousness, movement, or actions may be altered for a short time. Another study from Servan and Schaffer on 2014, in 2014 rather, they defined epilepsy as a chronic disorder, the hallmark of which is recurrent unprovoked seizures. Many people with epilepsy have more than one type seizure and may have other symptoms of neurological problems as well. These physical changes are called epileptic seizures. And the symptoms of the epilepsy, it includes the blackouts or periods of confused memories, episode of staring or unexplained unresponsiveness, involuntary movement of arms and legs, fainting spells with incontinence or followed by excessive fatigue, or odd sounds, distorted perceptions, and feelings of fear that cannot be explained. So when we say epilepsy, ito yung kadalasang yung parang nangingisay sila, yun, inaatake sila ng epilepsy. And this is the example of an individual who's experiencing epilepsy. Yung parang kinokontrol sila ng mga doctor or nurses. Yan, yung biglaang, when you say epilepsy, biglaan ito, yung hindi natin aasahan na aatakihin tayo ng epilepsy sa ganitong pagkakataon. Kumbaga, this health impairment is unpredictable. And the most common other health impairment that we also know is the heart conditions. Chronic or acute health condition as defined within IDEA, based on World Heart Federation in 2016, different heart conditions, rheumatic heart disease, hypertensive heart disease, ischemic heart disease, cerebrovascular disease, inflammatory heart disease, valvular heart disease, aneurysm heart disease, aneurysm atherosclerosis, high blood pressure or hypertension, peripheral arterial disease, angina, cerebral vascular disease, stroke, and heart failure. So the most common heart condition or heart disease that we all know is the high blood pressure, and it often occurs during summer. And yeah, this is something that we really need to worry about. And during summer, it's really vital for us to drink plenty of water in order for us to avoid heat stroke or high blood pressure, some sort of that. And now, may I call on Miss Manong Song Lordeline to continue this?
Hemophilia. Hemophilia is a rare disorder in which your blood doesn't clot normally because it lacks. Hemophilia is a rare disorder in which your blood doesn't clot normally because it lacks of sufficient blood clotting proteins. As a result, people with hemophilia may bleed after an injury for a longer time than those without the disorder. It's a myth that persons with hemophilia bleed to death from even minor injuries. In truth, the condition ranges mild to severe. Based on what I've researched, there are three types of hemophilia, which is hemophilia A, hemophilia B, and hemophilia C, which is inherited blood condition. So, here is the symptoms of hemophilia. First is excessive bleeding, excessive bruising, easily bleeding, nosebleed, and abnormal menstrual bleeding. Bleeding can also be internal, especially in the knees, ankles, and elbows. Next is, here is the, so here is a picture that shows a person who having a heart condition. So here is a picture that shows a person who has hemophilia. Next is lead poisoning. Lead poisoning occurs when lead builds up in the body, often over a period of months or years. Even small amount of lead can cause serious health problems. Children under the age of 6 are especially vulnerable to lead poisoning. So here is the symptoms or signs that you are having a lead poisoning. Irritability, loss of appetite, weight loss, sluggishness, abdominal pain, vomiting, constipation, unusual paleness from anemia, and learning difficulties. So next is leukemia. Leukemia is a cancer of blood cells and therefore sometimes referred to as blood cancer. Normally, the bone marrow in our bodies produces white blood cells and defends against infections. It develops when the marrow produces too many white blood cells and what's produced are abnormal. It's also considered as a cancer of the bone, marrow, and blood. So, leukemia is a kind of um, leukemia is a kind of disease that uh, when you have a leukemia, you are easily or you are near to death because of condition. So here is the symptoms and signs that you have or having a leukemia. Tiredness or no energy, shortness of breath during physical activity, pale skin, mild fever, or night sweat, slow healing of cuts and excess bleeding, black and blue marks, bruises for no clear reason, pinhead, size red spots under the skin, ache, aches, aches, aches in bones or joints, and low white cell counts. So next is nephritis. Nephritis means that one or both of a person's kidneys are inflamed. It occurs when your kidneys suddenly become inflamed. The kidneys are very important organs in the body because they clean the blood by filtering out excess water, salt, and waste products from the food we eat. It may due to infection, but it's more commonly associated with autoimmune disorder that affects the major organ of the body. So here is the symptoms or signs that you have a nephritis. First is high level protein in the blood or paradoxically low levels, swelling when a salt and water builds up in the tissue, less frequent urination, and weight gain from water retention. Next is rheumatic fever. Is an inflammatory disease that can develop a complication of inadequate, inadequately treated strep throat or scarlet fever. Rheumatic fever can develop as a complication of a untreated or poorly treated strep throat or scarlet fever. Here is the symptoms. First is fever, pain in one joint that moves to another joint. Red, hot, or swollen joints, small painless noodles beneath the skin, rapid, fluttering or pounding heartbeat, palpitation, shortness of breath, uncontrollable body movements, unusual behavior. Next. So here is the picture that shows a person of having a nephritis. And here also is the picture that shows a person who has rheumatic fever. Sickle cell anemia. Anemia, in general, is a condition where an individual blood has less than a normal blood of red blood cells, or the blood cells themselves don't have enough hemoglobin, which carries oxygen throughout the body. It is one type of anemia where the hemoglobin is abnormal and the red blood cells often become shaped like letter C. This shape makes it hard for the red blood cells to pass through a small blood vessels, causing pain and damaging organs. The disease is inherited. So the symptoms of sickle cell anemia is chronic anemia and the periodic episodes of pain in the arms, legs, chest, and abdomen. So lastly, or next, lastly is Tourette syndrome. Tourette syndrome is a disorder that involves repetitive movements or unwanted sounds, tics that can be easily controlled. It is an inherited disorder that is first noticed in the childhood, usually between the ages of 7 and 10. The syndrome occurs in boys 4 times more than girls. So, in Tourette syndromes, um, when having a Tourette syndrome, you are easily distracted. Next. Here's the picture that shows a man who has sickle cell anemia. And lastly, Tourette syndrome, a man that shows having a Tourette syndrome. Next is screening and diagnosis.
To add more about what Miss Manong Song have discussed earlier, we in our class with Dr. Gary, we watch a certain movie wherein there is a certain person who is a teacher suffering from Tourette syndrome. And now we're moving to screening and diagnosis. First one is a child that has impairment should always undergo screening and diagnosis for the evaluation and the early medication. According to American Academy of Special Education Professionals, if a student is suspected of having other health impairment, the following evaluation shall be conducted. First, a medical statement or a health assessment statement indicating a diagnosis of health impairment or a description of the impairment and a statement that the student's condition is permanent or is expected to last for more than 60 calendar days. Second, assessments to determine the impact of the suspected disability. Letter A, on the student's educational performance when the student is at the age of eligibility for kindergarten through age 21. Or letter B, on the student's developmental progress when the student is age 3 through the age of eligibility for kindergarten. Third, additional evaluation or assessments that is necessary to identify the student's educational needs. If a student is suspected of having health impairment under the definition set forth in IDEA, the following assessment measures should also be considered. An observation by a team member other than the student's general education teacher of the student's academic performance in a general classroom setting, or in the case of student less than school age or out of school, an observation by a team member conducted in an age-appropriate environment. Letter B, well, the first one was letter A, and the letter B is developmental history if needed, or a background of their family is needed in order to detect if the health impairment is hereditary or it runs from their blood. Letter C, an assessment of intellectual ability. It is one of the most important assessment because here we can detect other health impairments other than from biological impairments. Letter D, other assessments of the characteristics of speech and language impairments. If the student exhibits impairments in any one or more of the following areas, cognition or in the mental ability, fine motor, perceptual motor, communication or the language use, social or emotional or the societal behavior and character of a certain person, and perception or memory or how important memory lane into a person is and how important that the memory of a person is in high level. This assessment shall be completed by specialists knowledgeable on the specific characteristics being assessed. Um, in the statement, there should be a professional of that field to check on that person to really detect or to have a legal basis on his or her health impairments. Letter E, a review of cumulative records, previous individualized education programs, or individualized family service plans and teacher-collected work samples.
And now we are moving to causes of the other health impairment. And according to Smith 2004, the causes of other health impairment vary widely. Most result from infections, genetic factors, environmental factors, and perinatal and postnatal influences. Researchers may group the causes into 5 general areas. The first one is when it comes to allergies, like for example, hepatitis. The second one is the hereditary, like for example, is hemophilia. So when we say hereditary, it it is transmitted from generation to generation. And this disease, like for example, like for instance, the hemophilia, if one of the members of your family has a hemophilia, then there is a big possibility that you can acquire it as well, because this particular health impairment is so-called hereditary. And the third one is the accident, like for example, is the seizure disorders, like for example, ikaw ay nag-travel, tapos ikaw ay nagka-seizure disorder or what we call epilepsy, maaari ka magkaroon ng health impairment, like for instance, napabagok yung ulo mo sa rock or other obstacles. And number 4 ay multiple factors. Yun nga, yung epilepsy, yung maaari rin siya mag-cause ng other health impairment bukod sa epilepsy. Kapag ikaw ay na-aksidente, pwede ka pang magkaroon ng other health impairments. And number 5 is unknown. So most of the other health impairment is unpredictable. Yun parang nung pinanganak ka, you are normal, pero as you grow up, ay parang nagkakaroon ka ng other health impairment. So unknown yung other health impairment, or yung health impairment, unknown siya. Kaya kapag nakaranas tayo ng symptoms ng any other health impairments, dapat magpa-check agad tayo sa doctor in order for us to verify if meron ba tayo ng health impairment na yun. And now we're moving to teaching strategies. So as a future educator, this teaching strategy is something that we really need to implement inside the classroom. So as we all know, we have the diverse learners. So it shouldn't serve as a barrier for us to teach our students in a nice way, but instead we should promote inclusivity inside the classroom. And according to Project Ideal 2013, they emphasize that without the appropriate supports, students with ADHD may experience long-term difficulties in academic, social, and emotional functioning. However, there are numbers of strategies that can be taught to these students to enable them to have more control over their own educational outcomes. Yun nga, so those individuals who has an health impairment, if hindi natin sila nagabayan inside the classroom, maybe there's a big possibility na mapapariwara sila sa kanilang pag-aaral, or parang hindi sila makakapokus when it comes to academics kasi nga ay walang proper guidance. So yung number 1 guidance na pwede nating ibigay is allow extra time for these students to shift from one activity or environment to the next. Giving them appropriate or enough time and space to accomplish one particular task or to shift from one environment to another is vital for them, because as we all know, they do have that particular health impairment, and it's a little bit hard for them to adjust or to shift from one activity or environment to another. The number 2 is teach these students specific techniques for organizing their thoughts and materials, organize the classroom accordingly, and keep all materials in permanent location for easy access. The third one is allow extra time for finishing assignment or for testing, so just like number 1. Number 4, for more complex activities, simplify steps to make them more manageable. So as a future educator, when we are already in field, dapat tayo ay merong strategies. Ginagabayan natin sila. Like for instance, ganito muna yung unang gagawin, sunod ay ito. Kasi nga, they do have that particular health impairment and hindi sila kaagad makakasabay sa ating instruction kapag mabilis. So, dapat step by step para makasunod yung ating diverse learners. Number 5 is sit the student close to the teacher and away from any peers that might be distracting. So yun nga, in order for us to guide and give a lot of support to this student who has an health impairment, itabi natin sila or ipwesto natin sila dun sa malapit sa atin in order for us to guide them. Kasi kapag nasa likod sila together with their classmate na maiingay, yung parang hindi talaga sila makaka-focus. So, dapat ilagay natin sila sa una para matutukan natin sila. Number 6, post a daily and weekly schedule that clearly delineates each activity. These schedules can then be used as prompts to direct the student back on task. And number 7, keep these schedules as consistent as possible and keep unstructured time at a minimum. So, schedule. Dapat as a future educator nga meron tayong schedule kung ano yung gagawin natin sa day na to. Like for instance ay halimbawa magsasolve tayo ng problem sa Monday, sa Tuesday naman ay mag-experiment tayo para yung may mga student with disability or other health impairment, alam nila yung gagawin. Kumbaga parang hindi sila masya-shock na OMG bakit may ganito agad, bakit na may activity agad na ganito. Kumbaga dapat tayo ay merong schedule at dapat yung schedule na to, as what stated in here, dapat ito ay consistent. Dapat araw-araw tayo may schedule para lahat ng learners ay makakasabay, particularly yung ating diverse learners or those students who has an other health impairment. In a more global sense, teaching these students to create their own goals and objectives can help them learn to manage their lives across any numbers of environments and activities. This process include the following steps. Number 1 is clearly define your goal. Number 2, develop objectives to achieve this goal. 3, define the actions necessary to achieve the desired outcomes rather. So as a future educator, dapat lagi tayong may goals in order for us to achieve one particular target natin. And itong goal na to, hindi lang tayo magbe-benefit, kundi yung mga student natin, lalo na yung mga may health impairment. Teaching this process gives control back to the individual, allowing for greater motivation and self-awareness. So as an educator, kapag nagabay natin sila, yung parang mabuboost yung kanilang confidence to continue their study despite the fact that they do have this particular health impairment. So as an educator, it's our duty to guide and to educate and to accept diverse learners. So sabi ko nga kanina, as a future educator, dapat we should always promote inclusivity inside the classroom or even outside the classroom environment. And this is the end of our presentation. That is all about the other health impairment. Again, I am Jensen Marasigan Manalo.
I am Cyrus.
And I am Lordeline Manong Song.
And thank you guys for listening and for having today. See you on our next session.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys.